What if I told you that the most powerful man who ever walked the earth lost everything because of a secret revealed at the wrong moment? Get ready, because what you're about to discover will completely change your perspective on true strength. Stay until the end, because the outcome of this story is simply breathtaking. You'll never look at your own battles the same way after hearing this account. Over 3,000 years ago, an entire nation lay prostrate before their conquerors. The Philistines reigned supreme over Israel, controlling every aspect of that chosen people's life. 40 years of brutal domination had transformed a free nation into slaves within their own land. The oppressors held the monopoly on iron, their weapons were superior, their warriors invincible. Every grain harvested by the Israelites filled the enemy's storehouses. Every tear shed fed the conqueror's pleasure. It was exactly at this moment of absolute despair that heaven decided to intervene spectacularly, sending to the world a man whose life would be marked by extreme contradictions, divine power and human frailty walking side by side. Mothers wept for their children who were born already destined for servitude. The elders died without seeing the freedom they once knew. God's silence seemed deafening until he decided to speak through an impossible birth. The story begins extraordinarily. A woman incapable of bearing children receives a visit from a celestial messenger. The angel brings a revelation that would change the course of history. She would conceive a son destined to break the chains that imprisoned her people. But there were specific conditions. This boy would be born under a sacred pact, the Nazirite vow, a total separation for the Creator from the moment of conception. Sterility was transformed into supernatural fertility. The impossible became reality through the divine word. That child wouldn't be just another Israelite. He would be a living weapon in the hands of the Almighty, specifically forged to confront the Philistine Empire. The womb, once dry as the desert, bloomed like a garden after rain, proving that when God decides to act, no human impossibility can stop him. Manoah and his wife trembled before the magnitude of the responsibility, raising a child who belonged more to heaven than to earth. The Nazirite pact represented much more than religious rules. It was a physical and spiritual mark of absolute separation. 3 fundamental prohibitions would define his existence: never taste fermented drink, never defile himself with corpses, and mainly, never allow any blade to touch his hair. Those locks that would grow over the years would be the visible symbol of an invisible power. Each strand represented a link in the chain that connected him to the divine. As long as he kept this commitment intact, no earthly force could stop him. But if he broke this sacred alliance, he would discover that even the strongest of mortals is just dust when abandoning their source of power. This vow wasn't his choice. It was imposed before even his first breath, making him prisoner to a destiny greater than himself. The freedom he would bring to others came tied to his own slavery, to a purpose greater than himself. As he grew, supernatural manifestations began to occur. At critical moments, celestial energy would take over his body, transforming human muscles into instruments of divine power. However, parallel to this enormous strength, an insatiable appetite for earthly pleasures also grew. This young man carried within himself the greatest of battles, the war between divine destiny and carnal desires. He was like a burning torch that illuminated intensely but constantly threatened to extinguish itself by the winds of his own imprudent choices. The elders of Israel watched in wonder and concern, for they saw in him both salvation and the danger of unbridled power. Each demonstration of strength came accompanied by a demonstration of impulsiveness that made everyone wonder, would he be the promised liberator, or just another man dominated by his passions? The first major sign of his contradictory nature emerged when he decided to marry a woman from the enemy people. Completely ignoring his parents' appeals, he followed his heart's impulses. During the journey to meet his intended, a fierce predator crossed his path. An adult lion, in all its savage fury, attacked him in the open field. At that instant, celestial power descended like lightning, and with his bare hands he tore the beast apart as if it were paper. Weeks later, passing by the same place, he discovered that bees had built a hive inside the carcass. Without thinking twice, he plunged his hand into the rotting corpse, extracted the honey and savored it, deliberately violating part of his sacred vow. He shared the sweet with his parents without revealing its macabre origin. Small transgressions that foreshadowed great catastrophes. The honey, sweet in his mouth, carried the bitterness of disobedience, and he who should be an example of holiness was already beginning to play with the limits imposed by heaven. It was as if he were testing how far he could go without completely losing divine favor, a dangerous game between grace and judgment. During the wedding, he proposed a challenge to the Philistine guests: decipher a riddle based on his experience with the lion. The pressure on the participants led them to blackmail his bride, who after days of tears and pleas extracted the secret from her husband and betrayed him. When the betrayal was discovered, uncontrollable fury took hold of him. To pay the lost bet, he went down alone to a Philistine city, eliminated 30 men, and took their garments. He abandoned the traitorous wife, who was immediately given to another man. What should have been a celebration transformed into the trigger of a personal war that would last decades. The wedding feast, which in any culture represents union and joy, became the stage of blood and separation. The love he thought he had found revealed itself as just another trap in his path, and the woman who should have been his companion became the first link in a chain of betrayals that would mark his existence. The thirst for revenge consumed him completely. In a demonstration of destructive creativity, he captured 300 foxes, tied them in pairs by their tails, with incendiary torches between them. He released the panicked animals in the Philistine fields, transforming entire plantations into ashes. The retaliation was merciless. They executed his ex-wife and father-in-law in flames. This triggered even greater slaughter. In a growing spiral of violence and retribution, the supposed liberator was trapped in his own cycle of hatred and destruction. The fire he started in the fields ended up consuming the one he once loved, proving that revenge is a bonfire that devours both the target and whoever lights it. Each act of retaliation only increased the abyss between the peoples, transforming what should have been divine liberation into a personal vendetta stained with blood. When the Philistine armies marched to capture him, his own people, terrified, bound him and delivered him to the enemies. But at the moment of confrontation, divine power exploded through him. The ropes disintegrated, and armed only with the jawbone of a dead animal, he exterminated 1,000 trained soldiers. After the carnage, exhausted and thirsty, he cried out to heaven for water. A miraculous spring burst from the earth, reminding him of his dependence on the Most High. For 2 decades, he judged Israel, being feared by the oppressors and revered by the oppressed. Those who should have supported him preferred to deliver him, showing that often the worst enemy is not the one in front, but the fear that paralyzes those alongside. The water he drank from that supernatural spring had the bittersweet taste of solitary victory, for he had defeated 1,000 enemies, but had not won the trust of his own people. On a fateful night in Gaza, he became involved with a prostitute. The Philistines surrounded the place, planning to ambush him at dawn. But at midnight, in a demonstration of absolute power, he tore out the monumental gates of the city structures that weighed tons and carried them uphill for miles, leaving the main Philistine fortress completely exposed and humiliated. Each demonstration of strength exponentially increased his enemy's desire for revenge. Those gates, Symbols of security and military power became trophies of his enormous strength, but also monuments to his inability to control the desires that constantly led him into enemy territory. Gaza, which should have feared his presence, became the recurring stage of his weaknesses, as if something in that city irresistibly attracted him to his own destruction. Then appeared the woman who would seal his fate. The Philistine rulers offered Delilah a fortune in silver to discover the source of his supernatural power. She accepted the mission and began a relentless psychological siege. Day after day, night after night, she pressed him with questions, accusations, and emotional manipulations. 3 times he lied, 3 times she failed, but her persistence was greater than his resistance. Mentally exhausted, emotionally drained, he finally yielded. "My strength is in consecration. If my hair is cut, I will become like any mortal." Delilah didn't use physical force, but something much more lethal. She feigned love where there was only greed, offered affection where there was only betrayal. She represents the danger of trusting sacred secrets to profane hearts, of seeking in the wrong arms the comfort that only God can give. While he slept peacefully in the lap of the one he thought loved him, she executed the final betrayal. The sacred locks were cut. Upon awakening, he tried to rise as he always did, but for the first time in his life, he was truly alone. The divine spirit had departed. The Philistines easily dominated him, pierced his eyes with hot iron, and chained him to work as a beast of burden, grinding grain in prison. The great champion of Israel was now a pathetic spectacle for the enemy's amusement. Each turn he made at the millstone was a reminder of how he had gone in circles in his own life, always returning to the same mistakes. The physical darkness into which he plunged was only a reflection of the spiritual darkness he had chosen by trading his consecration for ephemeral moments of pleasure. But God writes straight with crooked lines. In the dark dungeon, something began to happen. His hair slowly began to grow back, and with it, a profound inner transformation. For the first time, he understood that his strength never resided in his muscles or hair, but in the connection with the divine. Months passed. The Philistines, drunk with victory, decided to display their trophy at a grand celebration in the temple of their god Dagon. 3,000 people gathered to mock the man who once terrorized them. The prison became his personal desert, where he finally learned lessons that freedom could never teach. Each strand of hair that grew represented not just the return of his physical strength, but mainly the rebirth of his understanding about the true meaning of being chosen by God. Placed between the master columns that supported the entire structure, blind but finally seeing with spiritual clarity, he raised one last supplication to heaven. "Remember me one last time. Allow me to fulfill my destiny." Resting his palms on the pillars, he summoned not his physical strength, but his renewed faith. With a cry that echoed through the centuries, he pushed the columns with the power of an entire lifetime of purpose. The entire temple collapsed, eliminating more enemies in that moment than in all his years of battles. He died fulfilling that for which he was born. His final prayer wasn't for personal glory, but for the fulfillment of the mission he had neglected for so long. In that supreme moment, the man who lived, divided between 2 worlds, finally chose to which one he belonged, sealing with blood his reconciliation with divine purpose. This isn't just an ancient story, it's a mirror for each of us. How many times do we trade the eternal for the temporary? How many times do we reveal secrets that should remain guarded? This man's life teaches us that talents without discipline lead to destruction, that strength without wisdom is disguised weakness, and that even after devastating falls, there's opportunity for redemption. His greatest victory came through his greatest defeat. His maximum strength manifested in his extreme weakness. Each of us carries within ourselves the potential for greatness and ruin, And often it's our daily choices, not our abilities, that determine which path we'll follow. This judge's story confronts us with the uncomfortable truth that our greatest enemies often aren't external, but reside in our own uncontrolled desires. If this story touched your heart, share this video right now with someone who needs to hear this message. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any transformative content like this. Comment below which part impacted you most. And remember, your true strength isn't in what you can do alone, but in whom you choose to serve. Your story is still being written. Make it worth it. See you in the next video.